Dreamweaver, Chapter 12, Little Friend. Those were dead eyes, distant and glossy. Missy had seen many since the ashes. The car rolled to a stop, the gas meter at empty. She got off and the eyes followed her. There were far too many pairs of them. Some were jaundiced, others red with disease, and a few merely sunken from starvation, but they all communicated one message: death. Not one of the starving or ill came to her. In this world, begging was useless. No one had mercy to spare. Missy walked on. This place had no fuel for her to rob or steal, as she had done on her journey. She hadn't seen the vehicle travel through in 2 days. While she walked and considered her prospects, Missy saw a pair of guardians pass by on horseback. Immediately she brightened. Not all was lost. In fact, she could leave a blood trail leading southward for the other guardians to follow. The curvature of her smile was difficult to straighten. She followed them. Missy knew she had to act soon. At any moment, the leisurely trot of the horses might suddenly turn into a fast gallop. She raced through the tight alleys to get ahead of the two guardians. Certain of her position, Missy slipped the rifle from her shoulder and gently cocked it. Under most circumstances, shooting no longer made her nervous. Today, however, she felt icy fingers brush up her spine. She didn't know how strong these two guardians were, except they had to be killed when she fired her first shot, or else it was her own life that would be in jeopardy. Time ticked by tortuously slow. As she waited, Missy felt a heightened sense of awareness, as if her every act was drawn out in slow motion. Drops of sweat squeezed from her pores, and her tongue glided over her parched lips, leaving a small glistening sprinkle of saliva in between its folds. She swallowed and felt the emptiness scrape her dry throat. The white ropes finally appeared, bouncing along the road. Clip-clop, clip-clop, up-down, clip-clop, clip-clop. Missy counted and waited. Her pointer slowly wrapped itself around the trigger as she squinted to align her sight. Missy's breath was already controlled, and even her heart rate was synchronized. Every pulse and every breath were like the rhythmic ticking of a death clock. Something flashed by the corner of her eye. Her heart stopped, and a large pit opened in her stomach. She spun around and nearly fired at the boy. "Oh, have mercy," she shouted. "No, you mustn't," the boy screamed. Missy turned toward the guardians. They were still too far away to notice the commotion, but it was useless. Her plan was ruined. She wanted to push the little brat away. "Scram," she said as she dusted herself. The boy didn't run but approached her. Missy instinctively backed away. There were plenty of incidents where starving children, driven to the edge, would kill with hidden blades or makeshift knives just for the few items on a traveler. Missy was aware of the forager parts she held around her belt and the guns, all very valuable. "They took my friend," he said, tears brimming. Missy was not convinced. "Trying to slip around me?" She smiled. Not a chance. She kept the rifle slightly raised and looked around for a grown-up. There was no one, and suddenly the kid ran off behind a wooden crate. The clip-clop of the horse's hooves loudened, and Missy ducked aside as well. Her attention, however, was still focused on the strange little boy. He peeked out over the top of the crate, watching the guardians pass, his eyes stretched wide. The hate in them was very real. After guardians were a safe distance away, Missy got up. The boy emerged from the alley and stood at the center of the small road, staring at the back of the departing horseman. He was about to follow when Missy called him back. "No use. Once they're out of the city, they'll be galloping away." "I tracked them all the way to here," he replied confidently. "And if they catch you?" He went silent. They both knew the answer. "I would like to say you're a sympathizer, but you don't look like one," Missy continued. The boy was not amused and went on ahead. "Hey, kid, I'm talking to you. Hey!" She caught up with him. "Back there, you said you were following them. Are you telling me the truth?" The boy stopped and turned to face her, staring into her eyes. "Shoot me if I lied." "The dishes are clean, Mrs. Williams," Steve said as he carefully dried the loss of the kitchenware. The loud, heavy footsteps sounded down the hall, and Steve knew it was his boss. "Why, Stevie," she exclaimed in a cheery, maternal voice, "you always do such a marvelous job." She bent over with a hand on her hip and the other on his cheek, tugging rather painfully. That was the only thing Steve hated about the woman. Being 11 already, he was not a kid anymore, yet Mrs. Williams still took to pinching his cheeks whenever she felt compelled to display affection. In fact, he would rather be caught in her suffocating bear hug than have his cheeks pulled. Nonetheless, he was thankful for all she had done. After the end of the world, she lost her family, including her son. At about the same time, Steve was wandering homelessly, starving, dying. While other adults beat and harassed him, Mrs. Williams fed him and even offered to take him in. Steve settled for a job. The last of the customers left, and Steve took his leave. "You sure you don't want to stay?" Mrs. Williams asked, as she always did. "No, thank you, ma'am. I'll do," he replied with a smile. He ran up to her, and after a painful embrace, he skipped down the street. Only a few street lamps lighted the way, for Bloomfield was a small, impoverished town even before the ashes. He had wandered through many villages, towns, and even cities, but he settled here for one reason only. Steve turned the corner at Harrison and Royal and stopped in front of a dainty two-story residence. The light was still on in one of the upstairs bedrooms. He smiled and began to comb the ground. His hand fell on the rough skin of a twig. He picked it up, snapped it in half, and carefully aimed it at the window. This was an art he had mastered over the past few months. It couldn't be too loud that it woke up the entire house, but the impact had to be sufficiently strong so that it was noticeable. He waited, but no one came to the window, so he repeated with the other half of the twig. Still no one. Just as he bent to look for more projectiles, the window slid open. He looked up. "Lucy!" "Shh!" The girl hushed, furrowing her brows in mock annoyance before smiling. She pointed up, and Steve wasted no time in scaling the nearby tree. By the time he was close to the large branch outside her window, she was already on the roof and waiting. The hardest part was always making the leap from the branch to the open window. From there, he could use the windowsill to secure his footing before pulling himself up onto the roof. By habit, Steve always looked at Lucy prior to the jump. Tonight was no different, and she always watched with large, affectionate, but worried eyes until he made it. Then she would raise both arms in triumph and silently pat her hands with glee. Steve aimed for the window sill first, spreading his legs wide to avoid hitting the windows on the first floor. His toes curled to dampen the sound as he slammed into the side of the house. He pulled up, entering her room. After a moment's rest, he ducked out again, feet on the windowsill, and reached for the rooftop. Lucy's hand always met his at the top. "What took you?" she whispered. They always talked softly and gently, as if everything that was said was a secret made only for one another. "What took you?" he replied. "I thought you were asleep." Her expressive face drooped into a frown. "I was waiting for you. You know that." Then she brightened. "So tell me, how was your day?" "I saw a monk." "A monk?" "Yeah, like those fellas, with no hair, who devote themselves to—" "A god," Lucy finished. He smiled. "Yeah." She pouted, but her eyes sparkled with wonderment. "I didn't know they still exist. I wish I were you." "Why? You still have your parents and this nice house. But you get to be out there and see all those wonderful things," she sighed. "My dad won't let me out of the house at all, and to think that I'm older than you." "By a month," Steve corrected. "Still older," she laughed and punched him on the arm. "So you have to listen to me." "You wish." He rummaged through his pockets and produced a candy. "He gave me this." "Oh, wow, a sugar plum. Take it." She shook her head. "But it's yours." "So? We're friends." Lucy bit down on her lower lips, her habit whenever she was caught in a dilemma. Staring at the candy brought back memories of the sweet taste, flooding her mouth with saliva. "Take half then, only because we're friends." It was hard, but they managed to split it. Savoring the candy's sweetness, Steve lay down and crossed his hands behind his head. Lucy joined him. "Why doesn't your dad let you out of the house anymore?" "Do you remember when I was really sick and I slept almost all the time? My parents think it has something to do with the environment. They told me it used to be different." "How different?" "Like there." She raised her hand and pointed at an indiscriminate point in the sky. Mom tells me that there used to be this round ball of light called the moon, and the sky would be littered with glittering stars. I've seen it in picture books. Me too. I wonder how it would look, Steve said aloud. Well, I sort of saw it. Steve propped himself up on his elbows. What? You've seen it? Kinda. Lucy looked down as if embarrassed or guilty. Sometimes when I sleep, I see pictures, but they're all really fuzzy and blurry. I saw the sun too. She seemed far away, her eyes staring past him into somewhere foreign and distant. It's bright and warm, not heat, but warmth. That's weird. Are you sure you're not fooling with spellbounders? No. She gave his arm a playful slap. You're so not healthy. Now I'm jealous, he joked. You should. You want to see something cool? Lucy got onto her feet. Sure. She pointed at the tree Steve had just climbed. I can break that small twig. She turned to him with a mischievous smile before adding, From here. Do it. Slowly, Lucy lifted her hand and closed her eyes. Her brows knitted, and sweat soon condensed on her forehead. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and her hand lifted and fell. A soft whoosh like a gust of wind blew toward the tree and produced a sharp crack. A small, thin branch fell onto the dirt ground below. Whoa, Steve exclaimed, truly amazed. Lucy exhaled and sat back down. She looked exhausted. Cool, huh? When did you learn to do that? Yesterday, she said. Her eyes all of a sudden shifted, and she held a finger to her lips. I think someone's coming down the hall. Lucy stood up, reached over, and hugged Steve. Before he could do anything, she slipped away. He went over to the edge and peeked down. A male voice boomed from underneath. Still up? You should keep the window closed. You don't want to get sick again. Steve fell flat against the roof as he saw a head poke out from the window. He waited until he heard the sound of the window slide closed. After a long silence, there were 3 soft bangs at the window, 2 quick and 1 slow. He smiled and whispered, Good night to you too. Steve awoke to loud screaming. Through the broken window of the abandoned house where he squatted, he saw the night sky ablaze. Men in cars, on foot, or on horseback swarmed about. He quickly hid and watched them enter houses and carried off the children. Some parents struggled and were promptly put down. He waited no more and sprinted toward Lucy's house several blocks away. When he got there, the entire street was in flames. He glanced around and saw several white robes approach. In no time, Steve climbed a tree, praying that they would not look heavenward. They didn't, and he slid down, following them. Around the corner, the guardians regrouped. Children were gathered around in a circle, surrounded by more white robes. It was a curious sight, for of all things Steve had heard, the guardians were on their side, protecting them from the evils of the world. He moved in, staying close to the hedges. Brother Lance, that's the last of them in this neighborhood. Can you tell which one it is? One of the white robes said to another. The one called Lance looked contemplative and took his time in replying. Leave the boys. Several guardians immediately carried out the order. Once freed from their bonds, the boys scattered. Some ran aimlessly about, while others headed toward a home that was no longer there. Soon, the visceral cries of the parents who lost their children mingled with those of the newly orphaned, filling the night with chest-pounding grief. Sniffles circulated through the circle of female detainees. Steve saw Lucy, tucked in the back between a ginger-haired girl and a brunette. She was crying. He had never seen her cry before, and at that moment, he made up his mind to never let his friend cry again. A truck slowly rolled back, and the tailgates opened to load the girls. Steve remained restrained, even as the truck started to drive away. Don't be afraid. I'll save you, Lucy. Just watch. See to it that the populace is remunerated. Then head to Tefleton. Brother Lance, leave it to us. With what happened to the executive council members, we each have a greater burden to bear. Work hard for our great teacher. May purity live in our souls. May purity live in our souls. Only a handful of the guardians remained. Steve watched as the 2 figures on horseback gave their final directions to those on foot. Then, as the horsemen retreated, Steve did too, receding into the shadows. Missy laughed. That's pretty clever of you, following their tracks where you can and horsecrap where you can't. The boy's serious demeanor reminded her somewhat of a younger Ainsley. It would be a lie to say that she was not at all moved by the child's story. How long have you known her anyway? Missy asked. 3 months. That's not too long. Friendship isn't measured by time, he said, annoyed by Missy's seemingly loose attitude toward the situation. What a brat, she muttered under her breath. Look, kid, you're in luck. I'm heading southwest myself to do some damage, so I guess Tuffleton is as good as any place to raise hell. I don't care what you do. Just don't kill those two until we get there. How are you going to get your little friend back? His cheeks sunk in as if he tasted something sour. He didn't meet her gaze and kept his eyes downcast. You were going to just follow them? Missy sneered. He glared at her, the fire returning to his eyes, a sight that was infinitely more pleasing to Missy. Ask me to help, and I will. You? He asked incredulously and scanned her from head to toe. Yeah. You don't believe me? No, it's not that. There's so many of them, Steve answered, voice and mood suppressed by the Guardian's overwhelming arts. Hey, can't despair before you even encounter the enemy. Think of Lucy. She's counting on you. Why? Why what? Why would they do that to the children? He looked at Missy, face weeping with disappointment. She had no answer. Lucy never did anything bad. She doesn't even leave the house. I'll keep watch at the campfire. Try to get some rest. She reached over and hugged him. You know it happens all the time. How many can you help? The world was far too dark, and her struggles seemed to mean as much as a grain of sand in the Sahara. She looked up into the night sky. There would be no moon or stars. She knew that, but each time she still experienced a pang of disappointment. Missy felt heavy. All she hoped was for Mariska to be right. Balance, she thought. If something so tragic is happening here, then something good must be occurring elsewhere. Somehow, the thought brought her comfort, because at the very least, there had to be happiness still, somewhere in this world. There had to be. If you like what you've heard and don't want to wait until next week, either be a member on Ko-fi and get access to next week's episode today, or read the whole book for free with a Kindle membership. See links below. Until next time.